The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.
Welcome to the Tim Heale Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to have a chat with Kate. Kate's going to tell us where and when she was born. She's going to describe what it was like, where she grew up, the school she went to, and the education that she received. So, Kate, you're in the room.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for letting me come play.
Good. Let's start then. When and where were you born?
I was born in May 1977, so I'm almost 45 now, so Gen X all the way. And I was born in upstate New York in the middle of nowhere. Like it's famous for nothing where I was born. My parents were 17 when they had me, and so that was quite a scandal at the time, where in a small town for them to be unmarried when my mother got pregnant and that sort of a thing. So by the time I was 3, we moved a few hours away, and this would be back in the day when a few hours mattered. You suddenly lived in a totally different, where we moved to was still upstate New York, but it was down a bit further south. So I was born right in the middle of the state. If you picture it, New York is sort of a backwards L shape, and I was sort of right in the middle. And we moved down to the southern border in the town where IBM was started. That's its sole claim to fame.
That's ticket to fame then, IBM.
That's it. Yeah, I used to work at IBM at one point. It's exciting stuff, I know.
Well, back then.
It was a very typical American public school upbringing, and public school means the opposite thing, if I understand correctly, in the UK versus America. And,
yes.
So it's not we didn't pay tuition. We didn't like anybody. It's where anybody goes who doesn't pay to be shipped elsewhere.
Well, in the UK, we call it state school, which is where everybody goes, and then you've got the private schools or the.
So this would be like a state school, and I had 2 challenges, neither of which is really a challenge, but it sure felt so at the time.
One, just getting up in the morning to go.
Not even that far. One being that I was a smart kid. And that can be tough, to be one of the smart kids, because you get kind of singled out and set aside, and you finish your assignments too quickly. And so I took a lot of tests twice in school because I didn't want to stand out for finishing too quickly. So I would do the whole test and then just do the whole thing again instead of sitting there staring at nothing. And the other was that on my first memory of going to school, my mother, I'm trying to think of a diplomatic way of saying that she wasn't a nice person. We'll stick with that. She wasn't a healthy person. She didn't want to be a mother. And I suppose credit to her for not quitting. Most of the time, credit for her anyway. But she told me as she was walking me into school my first day that I had better learn and be smart because I was never going to be pretty enough to get married. And that sets things off on an interesting note, because I was a smart kid, but I was told I had to be a smart kid, and that created this real intense pressure at all times. And it also created a sense of both you're not pretty and it would be bad anyway. Like I didn't, nothing was right. And so school was both a place where I felt safe and I felt like I knew what I was doing, which was nice. But I also felt like the odd one out a lot of the time. And, over time, I developed the friend group that one develops, and it seemed better. But there was a major falling out amongst my friend group when I was so we go to school through grade 12. And when I was in grade 10. There was a tremendous falling out with everyone arguing, myself included. And I had a really unpleasant interaction with one of the football players, and I was not cool enough to deal with the football players. And, football players are sort of the top of the social hierarchy. And
Jocks.
yeah, exactly. And so ultimately things got really dark for me. They got very difficult inside my head. I could still get good grades, but I was a very unhappy and arguably unsafe kid. Not so much that I made any attempts on my life or self-harmed overtly, but I could see it moving in that direction. I could see that I was losing stability and I
So
was losing
what
control.
were you, around about sort of 13, 14,
I was
15 years?
15, about 15, and
Yeah,
by
that's a normal sort of age for that sort of thing. It's very common in girl groups around about that sort of 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds to have a falling out. Generally, it's over boys and stuff like that, and yeah, and that does affect an awful lot of girls. You'd be
it
surprised.
affected a lot. It affected a
Mm,
lot, and by then, I had when I was younger, when I was 12, I was the survivor of a sexual assault, and that had gone untreated,
mm,
and so by the time I was 15 or 16, I was sort of barely hanging on, and I got lucky because when I was 16, so the beginning of grade 11 for me, there was a college fair at the local arena, concert and ice hockey arena. No ice at the time though.
mm,
And wandering around, and I was just looking to get out of the house for the evening. I wasn't thinking college at that point, really, but I crossed paths with one college rep who said, our college has a program that we call the Bridging Year program, and it effectively combines your high school senior year with your college freshman year. So you get to leave a year early. And I was
mm.
all over that. And I had the grades for it, and I only had to finish 2 classes anyway for high school. So I was able to take those at the college level instead, and I felt like I escaped, and that was a beautiful thing.
And did you go and live on campus, or
Mhm.
yeah?
Yeah, it was 4 hours away from home, so it was far enough away to start over again, but to start over
mm,
on my terms, and I felt much healthier in a lot of ways. The only
yeah,
thing I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. All I knew is that I didn't wanna live there anymore, I wanted to move
yeah.
away, and so it was an engineering school where I went, and so I started studying engineering. I was good enough with technology. I thought, "Sure, let's do
Mm,
this thing," and I went home, to my parents' house in the summers, and I worked at IBM, and then I would escape back up to college as soon as I could, and I wasn't happy exactly, but
mm.
then engineers can be sort of a dour bunch. They can be sort
So,
of dark.
what sort of engineering was it? Was it
I was
heavy
studying
engineering, light
well, I was studying
engineering,
mechanical
electrical?
engineering myself, but all of those were there. Um,
So, what sort of mechanical engineering? Engines, that sort of thing, or
well, mechanical engineering was like structural and uh, not so much like civil engineering, but more like the putting together of buildings and the structural components of things, and there was some engines involved, but it was more about
yeah,
building structures.
yeah. So,
Um,
so what that be? Sort of structural engineer.
Sort of, yeah. And,
Yeah.
um, and I was still it was so I was in my 3rd year of college, and I wasn't thrilled about it, but no one was. Engineers, like I said,
Mm,
they're kind of a dour bunch. Also, where I went to school, it was on the northern border of New York. Up the closest cities were Montreal and Ottawa in Canada.
mm.
So, way up north. It snowed from October to May every year. It was dark all the time. It was just it was not a place built for happiness, I think. And that seemed normal to me. Like, nobody seemed happy. Nobody seemed
Yeah.
fulfilled what they were doing. So the fact that I didn't feel happy or fulfilled was like, well, that's how it is. Okay. And then my third year of school, I got sick with a kidney infection and ended up hospitalized. So this would be the late 90s, back in the day when there was no such thing as an e-reader. There weren't even
Mm.
laptops at this point. And so someone, and I wish I could say who, I'd love to give them credit, but someone brought me a book. And for the kids in the audience who aren't familiar, books used to only be in actual physical paper form. Then you would hold them and open them and read them. And someone brought me the book Mindhunter that the Netflix show is based on. But the book is fully nonfiction, and it's about the profilers at the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. And I read this and I thought, this is fascinating. I could do this. I could like this. This guy seems to like his job. I could do this. And so when I returned to college, I dropped all of my engineering classes. I ended up graduating as the only psychology graduate of that year, of that graduating class in 1995 is when, or 1988 is when I graduated college, and I was the only psych graduate in my college. And I went on to study criminal justice and mental health counseling, and ultimately got my doctorate in clinical psychology.
Ah. So you understand people's thinking and their minds.
I do, especially because I ended up going into specifically forensic psychology, which is any sort of aspect of psychology that involves the criminal justice system. I opted not to go into profiling for a number of reasons, especially because I didn't want to be a law enforcement officer. And because if you're going to be a profiler, you have to be prepared to travel about 48 weeks out of every year,
No,
which is
like it.
ideal, right? Because you don't want to live someplace where there's serial killers year round. But
Yeah.
it meant that I wasn't going to be a great mother, and
Yeah.
family member. So I switched to forensic and correctional psychology, which means dealing with people after they've been caught rather than trying to catch them.
Before they done it. That's interesting. So let's just take it back into college a little bit. So you've got 3 years into engineering, and then you've gone back and you've switched. Did they run a psychology course at the college that you was at?
I stayed
Or
at the same college, and they had to create some classes for me to create enough psychology classes for me to make a major. But there are certain colleges that allow you to build your own major. And I had taken a few, and the college I went to is known both for its engineering program and for its management programs. And so were a fair number of management classes I had already taken that I was allowed to apply to the degree.
So you had enough points to be able to sort of switch and do your own thing. Did you on the engineering side? Did you qualify? Did you graduate with any engineering degree at all?
Nope.
You just switched over to psychology and
Correct.
went down that route. Okay. So, what was your first job once you came out of university? Then.
Well, I was in university for 12 years, so I had jobs during university as well, because you go, it's the 4 years of undergraduate, and then it was 3 years for my master's degrees. And I have a master's in criminal justice and a master's in mental health counseling, and then another 5 to 7, depending on how you count, for my doctorate to finish that. And so I started having kids, and I started doing a bunch of things. The first I worked at IBM. I had those kinds of things during undergraduate. The first job that I worked at within the field was in a group home for adults with chronic and persistent mental illness. So before the 1980s, they would have permanently lived in a locked psychiatric hospital. But in the 1980s, especially in the US, but really worldwide, there was this movement to deinstitutionalize and to get rid of as many hospitals as possible, because a lot of people can't support themselves on their own, but they
Yeah.
don't need to be locked in a hospital and locked away
Yeah.
and drugged to the gills, which is what we used to do to people. So I worked in this. You just drive by it, you'd never know. It just looks like a regular house. I think it had 10 residents there, and it was my job to help make sure they got their meds and got to their appointments and was available to help talk them down if they were having a rough day.
I guess there was a big change around that sort of time with the way that people were dealt with on mental health. It was I've seen it over here as well, where they were closing down the mental institutions and stuff like that. I think mainly over here it was probably financial driven rather than necessity, and they called it putting care in the community. So they closed a lot of these mental health units and pushed the people out into the local community, which sometimes worked, sometimes didn't, and sometimes just ended in tears, really. So I guess they were doing the same sort of thing in America.
So it's very similar. There are still, even today, there are still state mental institutions, which what that means changes a little bit depending on what state you're in. So I now live in Massachusetts, and in Massachusetts, there are private psychiatric units, which are sometimes a unit inside a regular hospital, and sometimes they're standalone. And those are usually short-term placements, 3 to 5 days, couple weeks at the outside, to sort of level someone out if they're in crisis.
Yeah. We've got a few of those in the UK. When I was working as a welfare officer for the Guards, there was a couple of places we took them. We took up to Peterborough, where there was a secure unit, and there was another secure unit up in Darlington, up in the north, and we had to take these guys up there, and they would be in there for a few weeks to be assessed as to what to do with them and how to treat them. So,
and ultimately, that's effectively what forensic psychology is assessment.
Yeah.
Is doing a lot of it's assessment at different points in time. And so my first job post all of this school, when I was all the way done with all of it, was at the New Hampshire State Prison for Men. And it was doing a range of things from assessing, when they walk in, what's their diagnosis, what's their history, what are their demographics. It's like a 2-page form that you fill out, up to people who are facing time, where should they best serve their time, who should and should not they be cellmates with over time. And also, sometimes they would ask us, the court would ask us specific question like, what's that guy's diagnosis, or are they competent to stand trial? I had made a decision pretty early in my career that I was not ever going to work in a correctional institution in an execution state, because a thing that a lot of people don't know about the American tendency to execute its inmates is that it's not enough for us to feel like it's okay to kill them. They have to know we're doing it and why. You have to be found competent to be executed. And I flatly refused to have anything to do with that. I was not going to play any role in sending someone to the death chamber. So I was perfectly comfortable working in the Northeast, but there are states I would not even consider a job.
I think there are 27 states that still have the death penalty in America?
There's only a handful that are active.
Yeah.
Still, but it's slightly more than half that still have it on the books as a potential sentence, and then there's maybe, I want to say 6 or 8 that still are actively killing people on purpose.
A pretty good deterrent, I think.
It's not a remotely good deterrent at all. It
Doesn't
doesn't
work.
work. No, not at all.
All right. And
No,
somebody's going
there's literally no one out there who's going to say, "I'm about to kill another human being, but wait, I'll stop and not kill them because the state is gonna kill me back."
Fair one.
You know, it's
Yeah.
in theory, it's a deterrent. In reality, it's just revenge.
However,
it
it does save putting somebody in jail for life
not, but it does not. Because it is
and let them out.
tremendously more expensive to keep someone housed on death row than in
Yeah.
general population, and your average death row inmate is there for 10 to 15 years minimum anyway, because there are a certain number of state required appeals that they have to go through. So you end up spending significantly more money for a death sentence than a life sentence, and not all the states in the US mean the same thing when you say life sentence.
Yeah.
I'm pretty outspokenly anti-death sentence only because I've never seen a real reason for, like, that it works. It doesn't deter, it doesn't decrease the number of people that are incarcerated. It doesn't work to, it doesn't cost any less. It's not over any faster. And most families of the victim, they don't say, "Oh, I feel better now."
No.
They don't say, "I have closure now." They just say, "Well, that part's done, but I still feel pretty awful."
Yeah, it takes a bit of thinking about. I mean, because the question comes up here on occasion about shouldn't we bring back the death penalty for certain crimes. But I guess unless it's caught on camera and there's 1000% proof that they did it and they deserved the swift and quick sentencing, and I think that's the crux of it. If they're caught banging to rights and it could be done quickly without going through appeal after appeal after appeal, then that's a good thing, because that then saves the state a huge amount of money.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of the death penalty. I do believe that we need consequences. I believe in the criminal justice system, and that it serves a purpose, and that there are some people, not a lot, but there are some people that need, I think, to be kept away from society, that will never be able to function safely in public, and public will never be safe from them. So I'm not trying to say, like, let them all free, get rid of all of the prisons, and absolutely not. It serves a role. I just don't like the death sentence itself.
Yeah, I can see that. So let's move on a little bit then. So your first job, you've moved. 12 years. You must be a bitchable learner.
It your brain
sounds like
gets
you
full.
just didn't want to leave school.
Your brain. Well, I would have been delighted to leave any sooner, but you just, there are certain jobs that require certain degrees to get. It was fun. It was mostly interesting, and even when it wasn't interesting or fun, it was still worthwhile because I could walk away saying, "Well, I don't ever want to do that again." I learned
So,
early on that I don't want to be a therapist, for instance. I'm a terrible therapist. I'm completely impatient, and I just find other people's problems kind of boring. Like, not my thing.
So, having spent 12 years in education, or higher education, at university, college, how did you fund it? Was it state funded because you were going into, I guess, eventually working in a state environment?
My undergraduate, I was primarily funded through scholarships.
Yeah.
And then graduate school was primarily funded through loans and working through it.
Hmm.
And then I had the dubious luck. It's a real weak upside, let me tell you. But in 2014, I broke my back. And so I have been on disability since then. And when you go on disability, they forgive you student loans.
So you're not going to pay them back. So what about your doctorate? How did you fund that? Was that or is that through work experience?
That was through work and student loans.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's your doctorate. So, and that's a 4-year course at the end of it all, is it?
It's the doctorate was about 5 to 7 years, depending on how you count, because you're not in classes the whole time. Sometimes you're working as an intern or as a resident.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to work out where your jobs go from this. So you've got your doctorate. So where did that take you?
So I worked at the state prison for a handful of years. I also worked at one of the locked psychiatric state facilities in Massachusetts. So in Massachusetts, there are the private psychiatric facilities, which I never worked at myself, but I worked with them. I worked in concert with them at times. And then the state facilities are the long-term placements. They're for people who cannot live in the community, cannot be cared for in the community. And I worked at one of those. And those are both for people who have already been diagnosed, haven't broken any laws, haven't broken any rules, especially, but just can't function in the outside. They are also for people who are going through the criminal justice system and are claiming that they are not competent to stand trial, or that they were not guilty by reason of insanity, that sort of thing. And that's where I would work with them and to do the assessment and figure out where are we at? Like, what's the question? You know, the state asks me a question and it's my job to answer it.
Are they fit to stand trial?
Yeah, that's one of them. Are they competent to stand trial? What is their diagnosis? Where should they be assigned if they're found guilty? Those are the big ones. Those are the most frequent ones. And then if it's post-conviction, if they've been convicted, there's also, you kind of check in with them sometimes annually, sometimes every several years, to sort of compare to baseline. Like, are they getting any worse? Are we seeing any new symptoms? Is anything going on here?
So I guess you get something like that film, Silence of the Lambs, where you get Hannibal Lecter, where I guess from your point of view, it's just entertainment and it's a load of rubbish, because when, what's her name, Jodie Foster goes in and you would you see that sort of thing happening, or is that
That was sort of fiction? I mean, Jodie Foster was being more of a profiler, which I didn't do, but I sort of, that the idea of going in, I did work with serial killers and other, serial sexual offenders and that kind of thing. And so you take out the help me find some offender who's still active out in the community aspect of Silence of the Lambs, but otherwise, a fair amount like that you show up and it's sort of a chess game that you're playing with somebody, because you need to get information from them and they're trying to figure out exactly how much information to give you and how much to hold back, and it's fascinating.
I can imagine. I mean, did you ever come across anybody like Hannibal Lecter, for instance?
Well, I worked with a serial killer. I worked with a couple. I can't name them.
No, don't ask. No names, no pack drill.
Right.
Just
But I did work with a couple. Actually, one of my most fun days at work ever is w- people who have already been found guilty. And this man had already been found guilty of one offense, but often there are subsequent hearings that they have to attend for different reasons, different court things. And when they go, like, they can be left alone in their cell at the prison, and they're either watched through closed circuit camera or guards, or they're just left alone in their cell. But when they're brought to the court, they need someone physically in the room with them, both to observe and make sure that they don't take off. And also because sometimes they get sort of relaxed when they're out in public, when they're out of the prison walls, and they'll admit to crimes. They'll confess to things that they hadn't confessed to before. And I was terrified. Frankly, I didn't want him to confess to me. I was like, don't on there. Because if he confesses to me, then I'm just stuck with this case for the rest of my life, right? And so I just like, but you can't say that. You got to be, if they want to tell me, like, you give them the warning of anything you say could be used against you, and we're literally in a courthouse right now, so maybe not. But so I'm sitting in the room with this guy who has already confessed to more than a couple of murders, on purpose, planned murders of women. And I was about 27 or 28 at the time. And so I was sort of right in his wheelhouse, as it were. And it's
you
a
would
little,
be part of his MO.
I was in his victimology there. And so I was nervous. I was new enough in the job too that I still felt intimidated by the job. Later I look back and I realized I felt safer at that job than I felt anywhere else, because the prisoners never touched staff, especially not female staff. In fact, I would, once in a while, prisoners would tell me, like, hey, maybe don't go across the rec yard for another hour or so, because we hear like things are going down. Steer clear. Because it's called status crimes. There are things that are only illegal for some people and not others. An easy example is the drinking age, right? So in the UK, it's 18. In the US, it's 21. And so if you are under that age, you can't legally drink alcohol. If you are over that age, you can. So it's a status crime, whether it is a crime changes. So the same thing applies to inmates, where there are things they are not allowed to do. Utter threats, spit, get tattoos, things like that other people could get away with that they cannot.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's knowing that now, I realize, like, I was very safe there, because they were very aware of what their status was and what was and was not a crime. But in the moment when I'm sitting with this guy outside in the little sort of side room to the court, waiting for him to testify, I also know that I'm going to go in there and testify, and I'm going to be testifying about him, and I'm going to be saying some things that he might not like that I'm saying. And so I'm nervous, and it's quiet and echoey, though, in a weird way, the way old courthouses are. And he looks at me and goes, I have a question. I'm like, oh, okay. What did the farmer say when he lost his tractor? I'm like, what? What? He goes, what did the farmer say when he lost his tractor? And I'm literally thinking, like, am I having a stroke right now? Like, what is happening? And he says, where's my tractor? And that's when I realized, that's when the light bulb goes off, that this dude, this serial killer, he wants to trade dad jokes. He just wants to tell stupid jokes. And so that is what we did. We spent like 3 hours just telling the dumbest, wordplay and dad jokes. And it was hilarious. And it really helped remind me that, like, these are not great people. These are not people that you want to just trust under all circumstances, but also they are people.
Yeah.
And so let's not just only remember them for the worst thing they've ever done.
So, have you ever come across somebody that was totally evil that you did want to be around?
Absolutely. I do have, I got signed consent to speak about 3 of the people that I worked with. One of them is another serial killer, a woman. Her name is Sheila Labar. And so there's not a ton of female serial killers that have been apprehended. And her body count is anywhere from a minimum of 3, but a maximum more likely 7 to 10, give or take. And she was someone who I didn't work clinically very closely with, and I'm pleased that I didn't. I came along just after her trial was done and everything, so all I did was sort of sit in the room, and I was introduced to her as part of this is how we do things. And she was terrifying. And I remember even before I was led into the sort of office where we worked with her, she was walking across the recreation yard in New Hampshire. It's a small state anyway. There's not a lot of people that live there,
Mm.
and there's I think 4 facilities for men. There's only 1 for women, and it's much smaller than the others. And the facility for women when I worked there didn't have any full-time mental health staff. So if they needed somebody to go up there, I would just go up, or one of my coworkers would just go up and do whatever had to be done. And that's why I was there. And I'm sitting in the rec yard, kind of waiting for everybody to get together. And this woman walked past me, and you just get that chill that oh, this person makes me uncomfortable. Like I literally don't want to turn my back to this person. And I asked the guard that was standing next to me, I said, do you know who that is? Do I know who that is? And the guard kind of laughed at me and was like, well, you're gonna. I was like, what does that mean? And it turns out that was Sheila Labar. And she was just scary, even by not physical appearance, but by her sort of presence. This is, you just get
Her aura.
this. Yeah, her aura. Some people just, that it would take nothing for them to go from apparently calm to dangerously angry. And that's what it felt like to be around her. There were a couple of men that were like that too, where they didn't seem like they had a good sense of control over their own actions, and they didn't seem to have a good sense of interpretation of other people's actions and words. So they would misunderstand, or they would make assumptions in, what do you mean by that? When you'd be like, I literally meant it's lunchtime, but they would take it as though you had somehow insulted them and their mother. And you have to be careful. You have to be aware that you're dealing with people who are living in a scary and dark and traumatizing place, and not everybody copes real well with that. So as much as I felt like it was a safe place, I never let my guard down.
Probably a wise thing to do, that.
I am still alive, so I think so.
Yeah. you got it this far.
Yeah.
So, what was your most scariest job?
I think so. After I had worked at the prison for a number of years, I started having kids, and as many parents can attest, kids ruin everything. And so suddenly it was becoming very difficult to juggle everything, because my husband is an educator, and so he had to work roughly 9 to 5, and with me working roughly the same hours, it meant our kids were in daycare all the time, and it didn't feel right to me. And so I switched to doing crisis assessment, which is primarily when you work in the emergency room, but that's the most common.
Yeah.
When I started, that was the most common placement for it. And so whenever someone shows up with suicidal or homicidal thoughts, psychotic break, a manic episode, sometimes substance abuse issues, depends on the state. And that was fine. Working in the ER was fine. Like, there were some people there that were not under any degree of control, but there were security on site and that kind of thing. And so that was okay. But around the time I started working in that field, especially once we moved from New Hampshire down to Massachusetts. And in Massachusetts, there was a push to not make people go to the ER, to give them the opportunity to be assessed before going to the emergency room, both to make things proceed more smoothly if they do have to be admitted, so that then all they have to do is show up at the ER, get their lab work dealt with, and then while they're getting their lab work dealt with, I'm finding them a bed, and so it moves quicker. But also, there's a lot of people that don't need to be admitted. And so the idea was, cool, go to their house, talk to them at home. That was terrifying on the regular, because you don't know what you're walking into. You don't know what physically is in the room. You don't know. All you know is what you've been told over the phone in terms of their mental state. So that was the thing.
Did you ever have escorts to do that? Did you ever have security with you, or did you have to go alone?
If once in a very, very great while we had police with us, but we would usually ask the police to stay outside, because the police there in the US, the tendency is to subdue very quickly and physically, and that's not necessarily mentally ideal. Sometimes you can talk somebody down, but you're certainly not going to handcuff them to calm. I would have, most of the time, a coworker would go with me. Usually we would go in pairs, but sometimes that wasn't possible. Sometimes we just didn't have the staffing. And so it was a matter of, look, either I go and try and figure it out, or this person's going to end up arrested or in the emergency room tonight. And so you go and you make sure your phone is charged, and you make sure the door stays open behind you.
And a panic alarm to hand.
I did have a panic alarm. I never used it, but I absolutely had one. Yep.
big tin of mace.
Yeah, like the air horn,
Yeah. So what was your most comfortable job then? Where did you feel the most comfort dealing with people with issues?
Probably the prison. I would think, especially because of the state that I was in, because the prison that I worked at is in New Hampshire, and so different states use forensic psychologists a little differently. And in New Hampshire, you're not, the psychologist is not I'm not a hired gun either for the prosecution or the defense. I'm just there. I've been asked a question: what is this person's diagnosis, or are they competent to stand trial? And my job is to come up with an opinion about that. And I made it part of my job to tell them. I would do whatever testing and interviewing had to happen for the assessment, and I would go write it up, and then I would meet with them again before court to say, this is what I'm going to say. This is what I'm going to go on the stand and say. And it should make sense to you. If you have any questions, now's the time to ask me, because you can't ask me in court. And if you think I'm completely wrong, I need you to explain to me why. And once the inmates understood that I could take feedback and that I was there to, here's the question I've been asked, and here's what my answer is. And, you don't have to like my answer. You just have to understand that this is what my job is. We got along pretty well, and you really learn a lot about things. And I think the thing with both, I liked the crisis work as well. With both of them, I would often drive home in silence, no music, no radio on, no nothing, and to sort of process and unwind and sort of take out the work brain and put in the home brain, you know?
Yeah.
And I would sometimes say to myself out loud, like, what an honor. Who gets to see this? Like, a lot of us have these imaginings about
Mm.
Criminal Minds or Bones or Silence of the Lambs or Rain Man or, any number of, the Three Faces of Eve. Like, there's all of these Hollywood type shows. We have these images of what it's like.
Yeah.
But not very many people actually get to see it. And
Mm.
I got to see it. And I tried to make a point of reminding myself that I was lucky to be able to do this,
Yeah.
and to say so to the inmates or to the patients as well. Like, thank you for talking to me. You didn't have
Mm.
I can't pull words out of somebody. Like, you had to sit in the room with me. You
Yeah.
had to let me ask you questions, but you didn't have to answer them. And there were some really profound moments that would happen.
Mm. Did you have anybody that you felt played you?
Everybody tries. Like, everybody lies. Humans lie. It's
Mm.
fine. You don't take it
So,
personally.
so working on that theory then, how long does it normally take you to sort of unwind somebody that that they're trying to play you, they're trying to play the system? I
It,
guess I guess it varies on different individuals whether how clever they are or how clever they think they are to be able to fool you to making a decision to their benefit.
everybody, like I said, everybody looks out for themselves first, right? And humans think that we're pretty good at knowing when we're being lied to, and we're actually terrible at it. But we're pretty good at knowing, I guess, to be specific, we're decent at knowing that we are being lied to, but we don't know what the truth is.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
there are often times where somebody would, like, they'd literally lie about their name. They'd lie about anything at all. Just lie.
Yeah.
And I would know you're not being honest with me, but I don't know what you are not being honest about, and I don't know where the truth is, and what is this serving you? What point is this serving? And I would only play for so long because there's
Mm.
always somebody next in line. There's always another inmate. There's always another patient who needs to be seen. And so for the inmates, I would give them maybe half a day, because the testing and interviewing could take usually 2 to 3 full work days to get through all of it, because you got to give them breaks. You got to let their brain rest a little bit in between things, because I was doing things like the Rorschach exam, the inkblot test, and written intelligence tests and all kinds of stuff. And so you got to give them breaks. And if I really, you get that vibe from somebody that they're trying to play me, I give them half a day. And if we get to lunch and I'm like, look, you know what? I don't actually believe a single word you said. And so that's what I'm going to go into court and say, is that this person did not cooperate with me. That's all I got. Like, I'm not going to turn this into a battle of wills or, get upset about it. It's just, this is just not working. And sometimes that was enough for them to be like, okay, all right, fine. Well, I'll work with it. And others, they would dig in and they would say, absolutely, everything I've told you is sterling truth. And then I would tell them, okay, then I'm going to go to court and I'm going to say, they told me these things and I don't believe them. And you have to be careful on how you do that, because you're going up on the stand in court, and a judge or the lawyer might ask you, like, why did you give up on them? And you have to be able to back it up with exactly what was said and exactly what was done. When I was doing the crisis work, everything is collapsed much briefer in time. So I had maybe an hour of face-to-face time to really to go from hi, my name is, to
Yeah.
here's what I think needs to happen. And so for them, I wouldn't give them much more than about 10 minutes or so before I would say, like, look, I don't have time right now for this, for whatever it is,
For these
whether you're
games you're trying to play.
yeah, and I would say, like, I don't know what your game is. I don't know whether you're trying to fake healthy or fake sick. I don't care. There's 4 people in line behind you. I'm gonna go
Yeah.
see one of them, and I'll come back. And what was funny to me, like, the first time I did that, I was terrified that I was going to be offensive. Like, you can't be polite, and especially being a woman. I'm trained to behave nicely, be polite, speak politely, and you can't do that. Like, you got to be very straightforward and very, very direct. And it was scary and difficult for me the first time I did, and it was with a 40-something guy who was, I believed, trying to make himself seem sicker than he was. And I didn't want to say to him that, like, look, all you have to do is say, look, I'm going to kill myself no matter what, and I can't let you go home. Like, that's it. Like, I'm not going to risk my job, my license. I'm not going to risk your life. I'm not going to risk the hospital's reputation, all of these things. If you say that series of words, I'm going to admit you. Like, you don't say that to people, but that's sort of there. And so when somebody starts sort of really pushing it and acting in ways where you're like, look, I know you think that you're acting like you have schizophrenia, but this is nothing like what schizophrenia looks like, and so I was just calling on it. And the first time I called the guy on it, and I was like, look, I don't know what you're trying to convince me of, but you're not succeeding. So I'm going to go see the next person, and I'll be back in an hour or 2, and then you can decide. And he was like, wait, no one's ever talked to me like that before. And I'm like, I know. I get that sense that you're not used to boundaries. And I'm like, I don't care. Like, I'm not sorry. And he's like, could you be my therapist? And I was like, you would hate me. Like, you would never come back if I was your therapist, because therapists have to be more patient and more gentle and sort of calmer. And I am not patient. And the very things, the directness that work well in the emergency room or in a prison don't work well in the therapy office.
So have you ever considered being a therapist?
I mean, you have to do it for a certain period of time. I don't remember the number of clients that I had to have. I think it was, you have to have a caseload of at least 10 for 6 months or more, something like that, beginning your second year in your doctoral program and continuing on into your third year. And so I did, like, most of my classmates really liked doing therapy and really hated doing assessment. And so they would do whatever the bare minimum. I think you had to do 3 complete assessments, diagnostic or learning disabilities, that type of assessment. And you could have whatever the caseload was for therapy. So they would do the bare minimum of 3 assessments and then run screaming. And I was exactly the reverse, is that I would do the bare minimum number of therapy, because there are people who, I mean, everybody lies. And I would be like, why are you wasting your time? Like, not just my time. I don't care about my time. I get paid the same either way. But why are you wasting your time? And, and people would play up symptoms that weren't really evident. They would ask questions that were overtly obvious, like, do you think I should leave this relationship? And the answer is, I can't tell you. Like, I can't answer that for you. And if I tell you, yes, leave him, you won't do it, because it's not coming from you. It's coming from me. And if I tell you stay, then you might stay and resent the fact that your therapist told you to stay. So, like, there's no win here. There's no right answer. And I would get frustrated with that, because you can't just be, I just tend to be more straightforward, honest, forthright, because I would rather offend somebody than allow them to get hurt or waste their time.
So, did you ever did you ever do sort of role play, or was it all with patients?
Pretty much only for real. There isn't. There's in classroom. There's the occasional exercise to do role play,
Yeah.
but it's fairly limited because it's very difficult to, if you role play a specific situation and you pretty much ensured at that moment that you're never going to encounter that situation ever again for the rest of your life.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. So they didn't. You didn't use role play much at all on your courses. I mean,
Not
what
not
about the early
heavily.
days of your course?
There would be a little bit of training that would have to happen at
Mm,
each job. I actually created the training program so I worked in New Hampshire as a crisis clinician for a few years, and then we moved to Massachusetts and I
mm,
continued. And when I moved down here, they had no training at all for the
mm,
crisis clinicians on that mindset of every person presents differently. And the answer is yes, they do, but there are still certain skills that are helpful that I've learned
mm,
over time, such as how do you ask a question? As a for instance, uh, you have to know. So the process for someone in an emergency room here is that you show up and they do a medical workup and they do blood work and a urine sample, and that's how they check for blood alcohol level, and the urine is how they check for other drugs of abuse
yeah.
that may be in your system. And so that whole process of the medical check and drawing labs, that's about an hour. And then there's about a 2-hour delay while the lab work is actually processed. And then I get called in after the lab work comes back because I can't legally speak to someone until they are sober, clinically sober.
Mm,
So if their blood alcohol level is elevated or if they are lighting up too many drugs of abuse, we
yeah.
have to wait until they appear to be able to give
Once they
consent.
stabilised, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And so when you first start, like you're given in Massachusetts, I think it's 10 pages of paper that you fill out for every crisis evaluation. And one of them is drugs of abuse.
Mm,
What substances have you used? And it's both what have you used, today? What have you used recently? How much have you used? How often? Um, do you use it to get high? Do you use it to maintain? Have you
mm,
ever? All of these sorts of questions. And they're all reasonable questions and they have their place. But if you just are flipping through one page at a time and you get to this and you look at somebody and you say, "So what drugs do you use today?" Their answer is almost always gonna be, "None. Haven't used a
mm,
single one." Even though they've already given a urine sample, and I've already gotten it back, and I already know. And so
yeah.
I learned instead that the trick was not to say, "What do you do? How do you break the law?" Really. Because
Mm,
honestly, I didn't care. I didn't narc anybody out. That wasn't my role. I didn't call police for people using street drugs. So instead I would say, "Okay, I'm gonna go check because your lab work is back. But, before I do, can you tell me what do you think your urine screen is gonna pop positive for? Which drugs do you think will show up?" And that puts it in a different it's just asking just a
just
little bit
phrases it
differently.
differently, yeah.
It's a little less accusatory and a little
Mm,
less abrupt, and they're a lot more likely to answer. And you still got the occasional complete denial or, somebody like you can smell, like,
yeah.
alcohol has certain
Somebody's
smells,
somebody's been
or
on weed.
somebody's
I
been on
mean,
weed.
yeah.
Crack has a very
Mm,
distinct, like it's a burned plastic sort of smell, which I had never encountered until working in the emergency room. And it took me a while to draw that connection of like, that's what that smell is it smells like someone has taken a lighter to a plastic bag.
mm,
And so sometimes, and they're like, "Oh no, not me, not me." And I had one woman, bless her heart, who her urine screen lit up like a Christmas tree. She was positive for everything. She was positive for things I had never seen positive before. And so I went in and I was like, "How you feeling?" She's like, "I'm feeling fine." I was like, "I would think so. Um, can you tell me what's your urine screen gonna show positive for?" She goes, "Nothing." I'm like, "Hang on." And I just went and got the piece of paper out of her chart and held it up, and I was like, You're actually showing positive for, like, literally everything. Can you help me understand how this is different from what you're saying? Because we can do another round of lab work if you need to, but it seems like this is your name and these are the things that are in your system, and we need to know what's going on." And she's like, "Oh, you know what? I think I know the problem." And I'm like, "I do too." And, she says, "Well, I made a sandwich today." And I'm like, "That's not what I thought the problem was, but okay, go on." So I made a sandwich today and I used a plate, and I think it's the plate that my boyfriend used last night when he was cutting up his drugs. And it was like, "You get points for creativity on that one. I give you a solid 8 out of 10 for creativity, but no, that's not how it works." But so, good for her. Like, that
Yeah.
stays with me, like, that plate, and I'm like, "Are you thinking maybe you should wash your plates more often or not, smoke them?" Like,
Excellent. So, did you get many like that?
I mean, there were always different sorts of stories about different sorts of things. When I started working in Massachusetts, was right around 2008, give or take, which happens to be when the the high art dance form known as twerking came upon the scene, and I
Mhm.
had never seen twerking, and my children were just young enough that we had not encountered such a thing, and, I had carefully avoided it. Like, I had heard the word, didn't need to know what it meant, and I got called in to do an evaluation at the hospital, and there were more people in the hallway than usual. Like, usually emergency room hospitals, in
Yeah.
hospitals, the hallways are pretty open. There were a lot of people kind of standing around. And I was like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Oh, you're here to see our friend." And I was like, "Oh, that's not great. Um, I guess I am." And they're like, "She's twerking." And I was like, "Oh, I don't know what that means." They said, "You're gonna." And I'm like, "I hate that answer every time. I hate that answer. It's always a terrible answer." And I walk in, and indeed, she was twerking. There was no music that any of the rest of us could hear, and she was wearing only a hospital Johnny, open in the back, and twerking enthusiastically. So that was like the start of that shift, and when your shift starts that way, you're like, this whole day is it's just
Can I go home sick now?
it's just we're just gonna pretend that this didn't happen. Um, I had another woman attempted an escape from she had another woman had an overdose or suspected overdose. It was never really clear, and so she had been kept in the ICU rather than in the ER because she was there for 24 hours to make sure
Mm,
that her system had cleaned out. And it was, and so it was my turn to go and talk to her, and we all knew that she wanted to be admitted. She had been clear with that. She had said to people
mm,
that she wanted to be admitted, and she was among that group of people who felt like she had to somehow convince me when the answer was, "Look, you say the right words. I'm not gonna fight. I'm not gonna." But
mm.
in any case, I show up in the ICU. The nurses in the ICU don't see as many psych patients, and they had sent the security guard to go run an errand or something, because usually it's a one-on-one
Yeah.
when they're not in the ER. Even when they are in the ER, often there's a security guard there. But this time it was just this patient alone in the room, and the nurses were at the nursing station, and they're like, "Oh, she's been fine. She's been sleeping most of the day. Do you want us to wake her?" And I was like, "No, I got it. You want to maybe get security up here?" And they were like, "Oh, we don't think she'll need it. She's been fine." And I'm like, "I am formally requesting security to be up here immediately. And you can say no, but I'm requesting that. I want it documented that I requested that." And they're like, "Okay, we're still not going to call him." I'm like, "Okay, that's fine." And I walk in, and I knock on the door, and I say her name, and she is someone that I had seen before.
Mm.
Happens. Frequent flyers happen in all kinds of places. And she opens her eyes, and she looks at me, and she recognizes who I am, and she leaps out of the bed and books down the hallway. And again, wearing only a Johnny, which, because of the sheer velocity, it became like a cape. It's just streaming behind her down the hallway. And there's people like screaming, there's people yelling, and and the nurses are like, "We didn't think she could move that fast." And I was like, "This is why I asked for security." Like, I'd rather err on the side of having security there than I'm not
Err
chasing her. I am
err
absolutely
on the
not running
side
down
of
the hallway.
caution.
So
Brilliant.
you had things like that. Yeah, you had people get very, very upset in, like, I watched one guy, and this is in the locked state psychiatric hospital. A guy got very unhappy with a coworker of mine, and I was in the chart room. I feel like this is back. I write, like, this is back in the day when you used to write things,
Mm.
rather than type things. And I hear a ruckus in the hallway, and I sort of turn and look, and this guy, who was not especially a big guy, pretty average height and weight, and he picks up one of the rolling carts with a computer on the top, and this was like desktop sized computer, not a laptop,
Mm.
and he threw it like it was nothing. Just threw it over his shoulder. And, because if somebody is angry enough and
Yeah.
they have not given any thought to consequences or whatever, they're just going to act, and that's what happened there. So, things like that. There were always moments.
So let's bring us up to date then. Where are you, and what are you up to nowadays?
As I said, I broke my back in 2014. I have an autoimmune disorder, and so my spine is very brittle. So I didn't even fall. I just stepped wrong, and it snapped. I don't recommend it. Not fun.
No.
And I actually went back to work for like 2 weeks after that, because I had already been in chronic pain because of this condition. And so I was like, I can work in pain. Had been.
Mm.
And it took me several days for the message to sort of make it from my spine to my brain, like, you can't do this anymore,
Mm.
because crisis work is quite physical. Where I worked, we covered 4 emergency rooms, private homes, 2 different office locations, that kind of thing, and plus schools. And I just couldn't. I couldn't keep up with it anymore. And so I went on for short-term disability and then permanent disability, and I spent a couple of years really feeling awful, just
Mm.
sad. And people make horrible jokes about, "Oh, I'd love to do nothing but lay on the couch all day," and my answer
Yeah.
is, give it a try.
Until you try it.
I
Yeah.
know. It's just, it was, and I just felt useless. I felt broken. I felt incompetent. And I have 4 kids now, and at the time I had 3. We later adopted our 4th, and I suddenly felt like I didn't play a lead role in my own life anymore. I felt like I was just playing a supporting role in everybody else's life around me,
Mm.
and that's not great. You feel very replaceable, very
Yeah.
disposable. And in late 2017, my father moved in with us as well. So now I've got 4 kids, my husband, and my father in my house. And all I'm doing is answering other people's questions and trying to cope with other people. And I felt like I was literally losing my voice, that I was no longer ever
Yeah.
speaking for myself anymore. And so on New Year's Day of 2018, depending on who's telling the story, either I walked up to my husband and gently tapped him on the shoulder, or I grabbed him by the shirt collar and I said, I'm going to start a podcast. And being a smart man, he said, okay. and got out of the way. And, and so I thought, I'm going to start a podcast because I listened to a lot of podcasts, and especially true crime, because that's the field that I knew a lot about. And I kept hearing the same questions asked over and over again, that I knew the answers to. What does it mean to be not guilty by reason of insanity? Or what does it mean to be competent to stand trial? And I was like, oh, call me, ask me. But, I'm answering them out loud while I'm sitting on my couch alone 6 months after they've recorded the episode, so they weren't calling me. And so I was like, I'm gonna start a podcast that's sort of true crime adjacent. That's what I thought it would be. It would be like 20 episodes where I would answer these basic questions. The title of it was going to be Ignorance Was Bliss, on the idea that, ignorance is bliss, but now you know it, so you're not ignorant anymore, not so blissful anymore. And I was going to make it clear how anybody could be a murderer. People always say, like, I could never give a false confession. I would never murder somebody. I would never. And I would be like, you know what? Give me 36 hours with you in a small room, and I will have you not knowing your own name anymore. Like, it's just, we are not as mentally tough as we think we are. I'm not. Nobody is. It's just the human brain is squishy.
Yeah.
And so that's what I thought the show would be. After maybe 6 months or so, I realized I didn't want to stay only doing true crime. I like it. I still like working with some true crime podcasters, but I also found that there's a genre of true crime that I don't like. I don't want it censored or canceled or silenced, but it's the one where it's a couple of young white girls drinking and calling the bad guy bad names. And their version of research is, I checked Wikipedia and I'm making stuff up. It's not for me. I don't, like I said, I don't want it erased. I just find other shows instead. And I realized that I didn't want to get pulled into that, and it feels sensationalistic, and it feels disrespectful, and it feels voyeuristic in ways that, the reality is it's not cool. Like, at one point I was at a convention. I was on a panel and also did a live show at a convention and was preparing for it ahead of time, and that one was for true crime. And so I spoke about Ed Gein, who is the guy upon whom Silence of the Lambs is based, and was found, believed, almost certainly killed 2 women, but likely more. But it was also thought of as a grave robber. He was one who's found with his house outfitted with literal human body parts all over the house and that kind of thing. And so I was refreshing myself, in terms of reading through. I have his original psych write-up, several old white men who did the psych reports at the time. And I also had crime scene photos, and I had and I wasn't going to show those in the live show, but I wanted to kind of remind myself of what it all looked like. And another podcaster kind of walked behind me while I was looking on my laptop, and they stopped. They came to like this dead stop behind me, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, I would have set up somewhere else if I'd known people were going to walk behind me. I don't want to impose this upon anybody. But their response was, oh, cool. And I was like, this isn't this isn't cool. These are dead people. Like, this is sad and hard. And Ed Gein was not a healthy or happy guy. He didn't enjoy what he was doing. Like, bleh. And so I decided, I don't want to be only in true crime. What is it about podcasting that I like? And I had sort of accidentally started doing a lot in the way of collaborations with other podcasters from the start. It wasn't planned that way, but I had an emergency room nurse who wanted to talk to me about doing crisis assessments. And so we started that way and we went from there. And so I was like, that's what I like, is the connection, the talking to people and hearing their stories. And that's what I'm going to do. And so I sort of pulled the lens back, pulled the focus back. So I still work with some true crime podcasters, but I also, I worked with an author this morning. I worked with a psychologist last week. I'll talk to anybody. And it's just about sort of, let's follow the story. Let's see what
Sound like me then. I'll talk to anybody as well.
No, and it's fun that way. And sometimes it goes where I think it's going to go. In terms of, if I have an author come on, they tell me about their book and they tell me what gave them their inspiration and why they wrote it. And I try to ask unexpected questions or deeper questions because I don't want to be like on a late night talk show where it's like, that's an interesting question, Joe. Like, I don't want to do that. Anybody can hear that anywhere. I want to take it into a more interesting direction there. But some people they stick to their own internal script, and that's fine. We work with it. And other times I end up hearing stories from people where I'm like, whew, I didn't think you were going to tell me that on mic. You know what I'm going to do with this now? And it's the best. It's been super fun. So I started my first episode was released in February of 2018. So I've recently passed 4 years. I've recently released 400 episodes and I'm rolling up on 1 million downloads. So that's insane. And I worry a little bit about the people who listen to me that much, I have to say.
Well, I'm a little bit behind you. I'm about 2 years behind you. I'm just coming up from a 2-year point in May. And I'm 135, something like that.
It grows. It grows, and it just becomes. It's so
gets momentum.
Fun. Yeah, it does. It gets momentum, and I am lucky that I was able to monetize my show, so my show pays for itself. Because I didn't want to be a drain. I already can't work out of the house, and disability pay is about 30% of what you earned when you were working. So I already was aware that I was not contributing financially to the house, and I didn't want my hobby to drain anymore. So I'm really pleased that I'm able to, my show pays for itself and for my own prescription medications, which is super important. And it's been the best. It's been super fun. I've gotten to talk to people that I never would have imagined getting to talk to. Not so much in terms of celebrities, although some were, but more just in terms of people trusting me with their stories. And sometimes it goes dark and serious, and sometimes it's ridiculous and stupid, and I love all of it.
Fantastic. So that's where you are today then?
That's where I am today.
Brilliant. Well, that's been fascinating. Hour and almost 20 minutes. Thank you very much.
I talk a lot. I do. I know. I miss people. I miss, this has been my out of house time is the closest I can get. I was, doing the pandemic isolation before it was cool. I'm like hipster pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, you're a trendsetter there. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Glad we're at the end of it. For some of us anyway. Anyway, Kate, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed that chat.
Thank you for letting me come play. It was wonderful to meet you.
And you.
The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.